us. I am so excited to welcome our next speakers. I actually can't believe I get to introduce them. I feel like I'm about to introduce rock stars. How do we actually make what we're building real? How do we actually build concrete solutions? So now, without further ado at all, building global leadership in the age of biology, please welcome the most illustrious panel of absolute geniuses. Nishan Degnarain, Megan Palmer, Michelle Rozo, Drew Ende, and Ryan Morhard.
This is not really the music you asked for.
There we go. This is a former basketball stadium, so hopefully we're making as much noise as we can here. So, all right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of Build with Biology. And so I'm thrilled to have this distinguished panel today. My name is Nishan. I'm an economist, and I'm delighted to moderate today's discussion. Just to set a few words of context, we're aware that there are some big global challenges in the world. We're trying to grapple with a world of 10 billion people, 3 billion extra middle class coming into the world in the next 20 years. We've got the challenge of climate change, the water crisis, the plastics crisis, circular economy. And if we look at the headlines, it's fairly doom and gloom of what we're seeing. But at the same time, this is a time of exciting opportunity and possibilities, this new age of biology. And at the same time, it must be frustrating for many of us in the room to see that there are other tools being considered by policymakers, and yet the synthetic biology toolkit, which we know can address these challenges, have not received the attention that it perhaps deserves and can be used to address these challenges. So with that, today's discussion is really designed to focus on how we can elevate synthetic biology as a tool for policymakers to consider, to build trust in, and invest in, to solve some of these big challenges. So the format today is I'm going to go through the panel and have that discussion, and I will start first. And we're thrilled that we have a panel from both the public and the private sector that can explore all facets of this question. So first I'll start with Michelle. Dr. Michelle Rozo is Director for Biotechnology at the White House's National Security Council. Dr. Rozo leads the NSC's work on biotech modernization and has held a number of roles as science and national security advisor at the highest levels of government across various branches of the US government. And Dr. Rozo holds a PhD in molecular biology from Johns Hopkins University. So welcome, Michelle. So Michelle, how important is biotechnology and synthetic biology to the current Biden-Harris administration?
Yeah, thanks, Nishan. Thanks first for the introduction and for the invitation from the organizers to be here today. It's great to be back with this community after a few years hiatus, and especially gratifying to be on a panel with some great colleagues and friends. With respect to the question, the president has made clear that the key question for our time is whether democracies can deliver for its citizens and meet the challenges that we face today. And technology will really play a major role in how that question is answered. There are a series of technologies that will have outsized impact for the decades to come, both for their potential to provide solutions to the challenges that we face, and also for their potential to be misused by adversaries and autocratic nations. So we think about a few major families of technologies: semiconductors and advanced compute, which applies to quantum, to artificial intelligence, to advanced communications. And we also think about life sciences, biotechnology, and biomanufacturing. As the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated, biotechnology is critically important for the United States, provided vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, and I should stop to say thank you to many of the folks in this room who contributed time and expertise and your brains and your technologies to contribute to our recovery, and which is why we're here today. So again, thank you for all that you do and for all your assistance over the last couple of years. But of course, as this group is well aware, the applications of biotechnology span way beyond health and address many of the administration's priorities, spanning climate change, food insecurity, the potential to provide new means of producing items that we rely on right now from offshore, so increasing our supply chain resiliency, providing novel energy sources. I mean, really, the potentials are limitless, and growing the economy across all of America with diversity and equity at the forefront.
Terrific. So it sounds as if there's a kind of wide recognition that biotechnology and synthetic biology, life sciences can apply to a range of these issues. And so it's clear that the role of US leadership is going to be important in this field. So how is the current administration thinking about building US leadership in this new age of biology?
Sure. So look, US leadership starts with our investments. And federal investments for research and development are at an all-time low. We used to spend 2% of our GDP on R&D, and in 2019 it was 0.6%, which was the lowest in 60 years. This needs to change, and this is why the president is calling for the passage of the Bipartisan Innovation Act, which would revitalize US government investments in critical and emerging technologies, including biotech. Not only increasing our investments, but evolving the way in which the federal government invests in research and development. So not just grants to researchers, but also investing in new types of public-private partnerships. Vehicles like regional innovation hubs that would bring together industry, academia, community leaders, organizers, nonprofits, to really build local ecosystems of talent to drive and nurture technology forward. And that talent is diverse, right? It's not just PhDs, it's talent across the whole pipeline. As this group knows, really anyone can build with biology. The Bipartisan Innovation Act also would increase investments in commercialization, so helping to move research from lab to market, overcome the valley of death, as well as investments in manufacturing, which are critically important so that more of what is invented here is made here. And for biology, that means more manufacturing of products that are sustainable and that have new and exciting applications to our economy. US leadership in biotechnology also looks like advancing a technology that is safe and secure. And that's why the president's budget for next year calls for dedicated funding for biosafety and biosecurity innovation. This would build in security alongside the lifespan of the technology and help deploy tools to make biotech safer for not just the researchers, but for the overall community. And ultimately, US leadership means demonstrating that leadership on the world stage. So that looks like working with partners and allies to build norms and standards for biotechnology so that it continues to be developed with our values and principles in mind.
Excellent. And I look forward to hearing over the course of the discussion more about the Innovation Act and kind of where some of the opportunities may lie for the synthetic biology community. I'd like to turn to our second panelist, Dr. Megan Palmer. Megan is the Executive Director of Biopolicy and Leadership Initiatives at Stanford University. She also spent a decade leading the safety, security, and social responsibility for IGEM, the Global Synthetic Biology Competition, and is chair of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Synthetic Biology. So welcome, Megan. Delighted you can join us.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really glad to see this discussion on the stage and thinking about US leadership, but also global leadership on problems that really matter.
So when we talk about US and global leadership, and you've had over a decade experience, certainly with IGEM and other organizations, how effective do you think we've been as a community, a synthetic biology community, in kind of elevating these solutions to some of these big global challenges?
It's an interesting question. I'm actually curious what the audience might think. How effective do you think we have been as a community? Who thinks we've done very well?
Raise your hands if you think we've done very well.
Ooh.
I don't see one hand.
Yeah, maybe there's one in the back there, right? Who thinks that we haven't done so well? A few more. Who's really not sure? Right, the vast majority of folks. So I think that's probably a right sentiment. I think we've maybe done okay. I think we're in a really important moment for defining the future trajectory of the field, and most importantly, defining who gets to participate. One of the most important things about this field, and one of the reasons that I continue to be inspired by it, is it's never just been about the technologies, right? It's been about how do we grow an ecosystem of people, of policies, of practices, of technologies that actually foreground the problems we want to solve and how we want to solve them. And also the aspiration that we don't need to do things the usual way. that biology isn't a normal technology, right? It's the stuff that we're made of. We have to treat it differently. We have to recognize that everybody already has a shared stake in this field. And so those principles and values, I think, from the very start, were built into the way that we built with biology. Areas like the International Genetically Engineered Machine Competition, IGEM, was really one of the engines for the field and started off with the idea that everybody needs to be able to participate and contribute to the field. And so these ideas of democratization, of participation, of really welcoming everybody's voice to directly participate in the field really formed the core. And I think now that we're in a moment of maturation with 2 decades of progress in this field, we need to go back and revisit those same ideas and say, you know, how do we be bold in saying we need to do things differently with biology? How do we continue to foreground the problems we want to solve? And how do we actually make sure that everybody has a chance to participate and to learn and to really experience biology in a whole new way and with a whole new sense of awe? And so if we keep those really cultural principles that at the core of our field, I think we'll continue to make progress. If we go back and just think, oh, now we have to do things like all these other fields. We have to industrialize like we normally do. We have to think about markets in the way we normally do. Then we're not going to succeed in the aspirations for this field. So some of those things are the types of principles we've been looking at through our work with the World Economic Forum. Some could say that the World Economic Forum is late to the game in synthetic biology, but I think it is a moment where we know that in order to lead with this technology, it needs to have a global focus because we're working on global problems, and each of the types of solutions to those problems might need to also have different types of regional aspirations, and there's much at stake. As Michelle was saying, you know, we're in a moment where we're talking about governance, not of technologies, but of our societies in which technology plays a central role. And so this is a moment to really step up and foreground those conversations about both technology and the societies we seek to create.
So thank you, Megan. I mean, you've given a range of kind of options that we could look at, whether it's regional partnerships, new types of partnerships with industry, and also just broadening participation through things like the IGEM competition. But as Michelle mentioned, there's also risks as well, and agendas that could be hijacked for other reasons. So how do we build trust in these kind of a new form of leadership effectively is I think what you're heading towards?
I mean, I think that's a question of our time across all sorts of different areas on how do we build trust. We're seeing in other types of technologies and communications infrastructures that we thought would engender more trust in our societies. They aren't necessarily, right? They're engendering more polarization in many places. So how do we build trust? We have to be trustworthy. Right? We have to be working on problems that matter. We have to have constant conversations with each other. This area that I've worked a lot in around safety and security that I'm really glad to see is being highlighted in some of the new plans is a particular point in which we need to look at trust. But that, again, goes back to the early days of the field. I think Jason Kelly presented the other day the early DARPA ISAT studies in the aspirations of the field, asking these questions of, is the ability to engineer living systems going to enable security, or is it going to threaten our security? And we're trustworthy if we continue to ask that question and be open to different answers over time. So it's a hard answer, but I think we have to just be trustworthy and work together over time.
So at least having that theme there is an important part of actually agenda setting, so that, you know, that trust and responsible leadership is part of the consideration. I'd like to welcome our third panelist today, Ryan Morhard. Ryan is Director of Policy and Partnerships at Ginkgo BioWorks and formerly led the World Economic Forum's work on global health, security, and biological risks. So welcome, Ryan. Ryan, we've heard from scientists and the public sector about the need for more responsible kind of leadership platforms. And Ginkgo's building a platform to address many of these big kind of global challenges. But where do you see this leadership kind of coming from? We've heard we need more leadership. Is it, do we have the right industry bodies? Should we be thinking about things like political action committees? Do scientists or the private sector, the public sector take the lead? So where do you see this leadership coming from, and what does it look like to you?
Yeah, thanks, Nishan. It's good to be on this panel, and especially thanks, speaking of leadership, thanks to you for being here, Michelle, on behalf of the administration. I think we saw an example of this leadership just yesterday when President Biden was in Iowa, and he said, we're not going to get to net zero without biofuels. And I think that's an interesting example of framing. I think what I would have preferred, probably what many in this room would have preferred, is if President Biden had said, we're not going to get to net zero without bio. Just full stop. And I think that what we're seeing is an example of, how are we talking about this? How are we bringing bio into those conversations? And it's worth, I think, in this moment to reflect on what we've just been through in terms of the COVID response and navigating out of the COVID crisis using biotech and the way we were able to position the bioeconomy and indeed synthetic biology as a solution to that pandemic crisis. And I think what we saw there is this incredible mobilization, and we mentioned just many people in this room were part of that. But it's worth putting it in context as we think about how we're going to solve these other problems. 10 years ago, there was another pandemic, 2009 H1N1, and in that pandemic, the world also mobilized to a degree, and we saw the global deployment of 350 million influenza vaccines for H1N1, and in the United States, 10,000 influenza sample sequenced, only 10,000. So 350 million vaccines and 10,000 sequences. Well, and 10 years later, we saw COVID. Basically 10 years later, we're at over 7 million samples sequenced and put in GISA library, and those samples and those sequences have given us eyes on where the virus is going and how to respond to it, and it basically allowed us to navigate through the pandemic, and also over 10 billion vaccines deployed. So we got from 350 million to over 10 billion, from 10,000 to over 7 million, and that was over the course of 10 years, and those 10 years could have been characterized basically by neglect of pandemics. So it wasn't because we had been positioning bio as a response to pandemics or because of investments in pandemics, is because the people in this room and in this community were busy solving problems using biology, and when a problem came around that policymakers understood to be able to be solved with biology, they understood it to be a biological problem, SARS-CoV-2 being a virus, they could turn to that community and see the bioeconomy mobilize and have this transformational response that would have been inconceivable even 5 years ago. And that's what the people in this room are doing, and that's what biotech is doing, and what we need to kind of see now is how can we allow ourselves and position ourselves so policymakers can look at problems that they're facing today in society, climate change being probably first among them, but also competitiveness, supply chain reshoring, et cetera, and say, hey, there are bio-solutions to these problems too, and then turn to this community and say, how can we leverage this community to solve these problems? And we'll see, I believe, the same transformational response to those challenges. And so when the president goes to places like Iowa and says, we're not going to get to net zero without bio, everyone can nod along and say, absolutely, and this room can mobilize just like we did through COVID, and we can respond to these other challenges too. I think that's what's so exciting.
Right. And it sounds also, in addition to the healthcare focus, just framing the challenge itself as a biological challenge, not just the solutions. That seems to be part of perhaps how we can elevate synthetic biology in this field.
Yeah, and I'll just be brief on that one because we got Drew here, and we can't let him just listen to us talk. Everyone's here to hear Drew. But it's about meeting them where they are. We were with some colleagues, we were in London a couple weeks ago for this circular economy meeting with a bunch of companies, big companies. And these companies, their leadership has made these commitments to be at net zero. And they mean it. These commitments are real, but they don't know how they're going to get there. Just to be very frank, I think they don't know how to get there. And we can say in this room that biotech will help them get there. But I kind of experienced it. They don't really. What do you mean biotech? We're all very conversant in how to use digital tech. We've been doing that for generations now, and kind of like poking around. I think a lot of people have forgotten how the physical world kind of works. And I think we have to say, actually biotech can make that molecule that you need. Give us a shot. And then that's going to help you get to net zero. And then what are the partnerships and what's especially the data that we need to allow them to take that chance? So it's meeting them where they are, and sometimes I think that means starting with their framing.
Terrific. Thank you, Ryan. And with that, I'd like to bring in Drew. And for those who don't know, Dr. Drew Ende is a member of the bioengineering faculty at Stanford University, a president of BioWorks Foundation, and a pioneer in open source biotechnology, recognized by the White House and many organizations for this work, and one of the co-founders of iGEM. So Drew, welcome, and thank you for joining this panel. Ryan talked a bit about framing the challenge as there are biological challenges in the world, and often a lot of policymakers either gravitate towards greed or fear. Greed as if there's an opportunity, a opportunity to grab onto, or fear because we have these big challenges that we have to address. Is that a fair characterization of how to think about synthetic biology? And are there other framings that you would think about for the synthetic biology solutions?
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks for including me. Grateful to be together. I want to keep this really simple. I want to talk about leadership. So when we think about leadership, that involves bringing people together to go somewhere, either because we want to go over there or we want to get away from something else. That's it. And so when we talk about leadership in biology, where do we want to go and where do we want to get away from? And everybody here talking about it, it has to start with talking about it and doing. Because when we talk to each other, that lets each other and all of us together struggle to articulate where do we want to go, what do we want to get away from. Let me give you some examples. I'll start with abiotic examples really quick and do a biotic example, and I'm done. So Al Gore, Vice President Gore, famous for a presentation, The Inconvenient Truth. It's a projection about climate crisis that makes climate emergency inevitable because it's a negative story about what we have to get away from. And until enough people understand that that negative thing is going to come true, then we get collective action, which is finally unfolding. Another abiotic example, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., civil rights speech. It wasn't, I have a plan, it was, I have a dream about a better society, more just and equitable society. Positive dreams let us articulate where we wish to get to in advance of getting there so we can get to collective action. So let's bring it back to this whole topic of bio. What are our positive dreams oven with in partnership with biology? How do we get to a biotic civilization by the year 2050 where we do have 10 billion people flourishing in partnership with the rest of life on Earth? Have to make the details work, which we can do, but we have to talk about this positive dream, and then we have a chance of being leaders. What do we want to get away from? Infectious disease, extinction, inequity, injustice, collapsing supply chains, like plenty of things we want to get away from. So the better we do at articulating where we wish to go and what we wish to leave behind, the better we can be as leaders. What I am so thrilled about as I get older is there's younger people, and they have these amazing careers and jobs, and our institutions and governments are becoming biotic in addition to our corporations, right? So each of us matters, both in our own actions and in our conversations, but also in enabling, like the biotic workforce to enable the biotic society. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Drew. And so just listening to the panel, certain themes are emerging. Number one, we need to do more. There are some solutions and opportunities out there, but we still need to do more to elevate synthetic biology amongst decision makers. Number two, the framing is critical, how we frame both the challenges and the solutions. Number three, we need to be a lot more inclusive in how we have those conversations, who we bring around the table, the different partners. And number four, there's perhaps something more aspirational, like that I have a plan, I have a dream. And in the last few minutes that we have remaining, I'd just like to turn to all the panelists just to give one reflection. If there's one takeaway, one action that the audience here of synthetic biology leaders and scientists and businesses can take away, what would that reflection or that urge or that call to action be? I'll start with you, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it touches on remarks from everybody up here, how awesome this group is at communicating about the potential of biology, making that tangible for folks that are non-biologists. And I just want to say from the government perspective, just emphasize how important your voice is to all of us. As we develop policies and guidelines and regulations around biotech, we need to hear from you. And so as biotech continues to grow and increase, just hope that the touch points between government and this community also grow as well.
Thank you. Megan.
I would just return to we don't have to do things the usual way. And I don't think we can't. This is a technology that we are all made of and that provides a vast array of solutions to problems that really matter. But it also it matters in how we see ourselves as part of a world, as part of a complex ecology. And so while we also are chasing towards these solutions, let's make sure we find space for a little bit of awe and recognition that we don't have to do things the normal way.
Right.
Yeah, and thanks again. I think the thing that this group can keep doing is just to keep bringing into the world sort of applications to demonstrate in ways that everyone can see and understand and feel and benefit from, demonstrate the power of biology to realize that positive vision that Drew was just articulating, because people need those examples.
Perfect. Drew, and final word.
When people express fear or concern, listen carefully. The gift of fear is the opportunity to become courageous in overcoming that fear. The more we can listen about the potential negatives, the better job we can be as leaders in going to where we wish to be all together.
Well, with those words of wisdom, I'd like all of you to join me in thanking the panel for what's been a terrific discussion this morning. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing.